everyone. Welcome back to the Restore Lab, a functional nutrition podcast where we talk all things functional medicine, functional nutrition, and working on lifestyle habit change. So today we have a fun episode planned, and we're doing an Ask the Nutritionist series. So I pulled people on social media to ask any sort of nutrition or functional medicine related questions, and I'm going to answer them today. So we're pulling out of a hat questions. Let's get started. So our first question is about weight loss. Would you recommend eating in a calorie deficit to lose weight? So the calorie deficit question is nuanced. Ultimately, I would say yes, but that's not the only piece of the weight loss equation. So a calorie deficit is going to help with weight loss. Really, when we're talking about losing weight, we want to talk about sustainable weight loss, right? We want to get off the yo-yo dieting, and we want to make sure the weight loss is slow and long-term, basically, because if we drop weight too quickly, our metabolism kind of freaks out and actually reduces our metabolic rate, and that thwarts our weight loss attempts, and then we end up regaining weight. And so that's where the yo-yo dieting comes in. So it's not a major calorie deficit, but a small calorie deficit will help. The goal for weight loss is losing half a pound to a pound a week for sustainability. And so that's really important because, again, we want to make sure if you're doing something, one, that it's going to be sustainable long term to get the benefit long term, and two, so that it does support and not kind of wreck metabolism. So without getting too nitty gritty into the numbers, calorie deficit can look like a couple hundred calories less per day. But again, small consistent things over time are actually really what build up to produce results. So if we are trying to crunch the numbers on the back end, sometimes what we'll do is figure out what your basal metabolic rate is. And so that's a number that you can use a calculator online, your BMR. That's how many calories you're burning at rest. You could potentially take that number and use that as a calorie goal if you're trying to lose weight. And because usually what we do is we take that number and then multiply it by how active you are. So that could be, again, if we're getting a little more technical, a way to do it. But yes, a small calorie deficit over time, one, I think is more sustainable than a large calorie deficit. And two, kind of retraining your body over time in small ways, your body likes that better. And then there's the other discussion about what do those calories look like for weight loss. And then we're really talking about protein first. So we always say protein is primary because that's really going to make sure when you're losing weight that we're losing fat and we're trying to hold on to our lean body mass, which is our muscle. And that's protective for our metabolism. So when we're losing weight, again, we want to really avoid dropping weight quickly. So we don't want to drop calories super quickly. We don't want to do it for a long period of time because that's a huge stress on the body. But also that will encourage both fat loss as well as muscle loss. And we don't want to lose our muscle because that is metabolically protective and that's helping us to burn more calories at rest. So it's definitely a nuanced equation. But again, I think the yo-yo dieting is quick weight loss equals quick calorie deficit, and all these quick things, quick weight loss will also lead to quick weight regain. And so it's really, again, the same general rule for everything here is small sustainable changes that, again, are doable and feel realistic over time, and then you'll be able to maintain that long term. All right, next question. Tips for lowering cortisol. That's a good question. So cortisol is a big topic right now, high cortisol, low cortisol, and we do generally live in a stressed out world where cortisol is part of the equation. Cortisol is part of that sympathetic mode. So when we're in fight or flight, cortisol is produced by our adrenal glands in order to basically help raise our blood sugar and help do a whole cascade of things that are going to help us run from a tiger to keep us alive. The thing in today's society is that one, that's happening chronically, and that should not be elevated chronically. And two, it's something that we really don't want to be elevated over time because it can cause a cascade of things like weight gain and other downstream issues. So we do we want a balanced cortisol. Again, in the morning, actually, when we wake up, we want to have what we call our cortisol awakening response. So that's a spike about 30 minutes after we wake up, which would be normal. And then it progressively basically decreases throughout the day. We want our cortisol to be less at night because that will help us to fall asleep and rest. So sometimes when people get cortisol testing done, instead of having that spike and then that slow decrease, it's staying higher than it should. And that is an instance where we might want to work on lowering cortisol. So tips to reduce cortisol, they kind of run the gamut. A major thing being basically working on nervous system regulation. So we want to basically make the body feel safe and activate the parasympathetic mode so that it switches out of that fight-flight stage and we can get into that rest and digest stage. And that is ultimately going to help reduce the production of cortisol because the body is switching modes, and that's really key. So ways that we can do that are, resting, getting the body to feel safe, meditation, yoga, those calming activities. And then, getting into the functional medicine ideas of vagus nerve stimulation, which the vagus nerve basically helps our parasympathetic mode and stimulate that rest and digest. So vagus nerve stimulation looks like doing things that are basically, it runs right through here. So doing anything that causes vibration here. So that's why they talk about gargling, water, humming, singing. Those are all things, and meditating or like chanting. Those are things that can kind of help stimulate that vagus nerve in a way that's beneficial to produce that rest and digest mode, basically. So that's a term that you hear thrown out a lot. And that's the reasoning is partially for helping lower cortisol. Other things that are beneficial are keeping our blood sugar balanced. And so making sure that we're getting enough protein in can be extremely helpful, and not fasting for super long periods of time. So sometimes if somebody has high cortisol, I don't recommend doing intermittent fasting or fasting for too long because that is a stressor on the body. And if we have high cortisol, then the body is seemingly stressed out enough. So we don't need to add more stressors onto that. So that can also look like not drinking coffee on an empty stomach. So in the morning, maybe getting some protein, healthy fats, and fiber in the form of a balanced breakfast, and then having potentially coffee either with or after your meal. That can be helpful too from the cortisol standpoint. And then even in terms of getting the right cortisol levels to be where we want them to be at the right time of day, that talks again about circadian rhythms. So our cortisol basically pathway runs on like the circadian rhythm pathway, if that makes sense. So if we're waking and going to sleep at similar times, then our cortisol can get regulated that way. But getting also morning light in the morning via the sunshine, ideally, or getting outside and getting a little bit of morning light helps with our cortisol production and regulating that. So that can be helpful for cortisol regulation as well. And then talking about adaptogens are helpful because adaptogens can help lower cortisol. Certain adaptogens can help also elevate cortisol, which is the cool thing about adaptogens. They kind of go into the body and they're modulators. So they can bring it up if need be, and they can bring things down if need be, which is just the coolest thing. So adaptogens that can help lower cortisol, the first one that comes to mind being ashwagandha. And that is a very popular one that I use pretty regularly in a tincture form, putting it in tea. It comes in a lot of supplements. That can be really helpful. And with anything herbal or supplement-wise, you do want to cross-check for herb interactions, herb-drug interactions, because ashwagandha can have some interactions with medications as well. So ashwagandha is a great one. Rhodiola is another one. Throw some of the medicinal mushrooms like reishi and cordyceps can be helpful. So there are a bunch of herbal adaptogens that can be helpful. L-theanine is a good one that can help to lower cortisol. But again, doing some of those lifestyle things ultimately is more of a root cause approach to lowering cortisol than like a Band-Aid approach. So the cortisol picture is very interesting. and can be a part of the equation when, we're doing everything else right, but we're still in kind of that high sympathetic state. Okay, next question. Chlorophyll drops in water. Is there any actual benefit? So when we're talking about things like adding drops of chlorophyll to water or doing some of these higher level, wellness trends, I really like to say that like it's a nice to have, but not a need to have kind of thing. So, none of us are depleted because we haven't been putting chlorophyll in our water. There's other ways to get chlorophyll. I mean, there's whole foods ways to get chlorophyll, which would include eating leafy greens. So chlorophyll's giving that color to the dark leafy greens, which is why we like, instead of eating an iceberg lettuce, we like eating dark leafy things like kale, spinach, spring mix. Those sorts of darkly pigmented things have more chlorophyll in them. So you could have green beans, broccoli, things like that are going to have chlorophyll in them from a whole foods perspective. So I would say one also is the chlorophyll supplement is that checked for purity, because chlorophyll and chlorella, they need to be checked for purity standards, and you want to make sure it would be something third-party tested. I think if you're eating leafy greens and you're doing more whole foods, that we don't need to be putting chlorophyll in our water, quite frankly. Could you if you wanted to? Sure. Go for it. But I don't think you need to. Okay. Next one. What is epigenetics? That's a great one. That's a great question. So epigenetics is basically the study of how our environment interacts with our genes. So epi meaning environment, genetics is our genetic expression. So this is a really cool study, science. There's really cool science behind this, because basically this is proving that, we can't change our genetics. That is like the hardware on the computer, but we can change our environment. And this is the whole conversation and what I talk to patients and clients about daily, is that what we're doing with our behaviors in our environment is impacting our genes at the genetic level, so at the level of the DNA, which is so cool and so interesting. And so if you have a genetic predisposition for something like diabetes, maybe you have a family history of it, or cancer, or something like that, that there is a genetic predisposition to something, it does not mean you are 100% going to get it. What can influence whether you do get that or not is how your environment expresses those genes. So I like to think about it like a light switch. Certain things that we do from a food, from a diet, from a lifestyle perspective, movement, sleep, all those sorts of things, stress, those sorts of things can basically turn off or turn on genes. And that can work either positively or negatively. So things, I like to talk about food a lot with people, but for example, something like green tea, the EGCG in green tea is really, from a mechanistic standpoint, it's going to that nucleus of the cell, and that's where the genes lie, in the nucleus of the cell, and it's turning on the antioxidant response element that basically helps to turn off the negative genes and turn on the beneficial genes, which is so cool. So the more that we're doing, the more that we're eating of these positive gene expressors or positive foods that are helping antioxidants, eating antioxidants and things like that, those are essentially going and sending messages to our nucleus to tell the good genes to turn on and the bad genes to turn off. And it's really, again, it's majority rule. So if we're eating a majority of good foods, it's going to really help that genetic expression level. And if we're not eating any sorts of whole foods or those colorful pigmented foods or antioxidants, or we're not sleeping enough, or we're not getting movement in, those are going to potentially allow the genetic expression of those not so beneficial genes to be expressed. And so it's a very fluid thing. Our environment's dynamic and ever changing. So it's never too late to start to change lifestyle in order to impact what's going on at that genetic level. So I think and we're really in the infancy of understanding epigenetics, but we do know that to be true, that our environment is helping our genes express themselves. So I think if there's no other reason to be eating a healthy diet or moving or getting enough sleep, that in and of itself is going to help determine whether you do or don't get these chronic diseases decades later in life. And the earlier we start, the better. Next question, is cardio the best way to lose weight? The short answer is no. Cardio is not the best way to lose weight. I think it can be a nice part of a weight loss journey. Cardiovascular health is incredibly important, and cardio, whether we're getting our heart rate up by either fast walking or running outside or on a treadmill, if we're on a bike, if we're swimming, those are all more cardiovascular workouts. So they're getting our heart rate up, which is fantastic. But really, when we're talking about weight loss, I always bring in resistance training into that conversation. So we want to gain lean body mass, which is muscle mass, in order to basically turn fat cells into muscle. And that's basically how that works. So when we're talking about like body recomposition, if there's a weight loss picture and there's maybe potentially more fat than we want, we basically can convert the fat into muscle, and muscle burns fat. And so having more muscle is really protective, again, from a metabolism standpoint, a weight loss standpoint, and having more muscle on our body burns more calories at rest because it needs more. So if we have more muscle on your skeleton, you're burning more calories than somebody who has maybe somebody of the same weight, but they have more fat versus muscle. So that's where the resistance training piece comes in. It also helps with, again, just body recomposition, like feeling like your clothes are fitting better and things like that. And it's helpful from a blood sugar standpoint. So it's helpful for so many reasons. And then especially longevity and all of the aging properties that we want higher muscles. So we want resistance training to be a huge part of the equation when we're talking about weight loss, but also any other goals that we have. And that doesn't mean no cardio. It just means cardio and resistance training. And as a physical therapist, you don't want to just be doing one thing all the time. We do like the idea of cross-training, doing different activities, working different muscle groups. It works your brain differently. And that way we're avoiding risk for injury by overuse too. So switching it up will keep it more interesting. This is another good follow-up question. How do I know how much exercise my body needs? So, technically speaking, the ACSM recommendations for exercise for like the general population, just for maintaining health, is getting 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise per week. And so if we're talking the 150 minutes, that's more of the aerobic exercise. And so that is maybe 5 days a week, getting 30 minutes of a moderate intensity, meaning, you're out of breath, like you can't just hold a conversation with somebody, but you're not so out of breath that you can't talk. And so maybe we're looking at level of like 5 to 7 to 8 on that like level of exertion scale, up to 10. 10 being you can't speak at all, 0 meaning like you're sitting at rest. So, we want to be at that like 5 to 7 level if we're talking moderate intensity, 30 minutes, 5 times a week. Again, that's a general recommendation based on evidence, but that they've had that recommendation for years. And then, or 75 minutes, which would be like 3 20 to 25 minute high intensity vigorous workouts a week. And so it's an and or. And then we just talked about resistance training. So resistance training generally twice a week is ideal, at least twice a week. So if you're doing it twice a week, maybe you're separating them, giving yourself a day or two in between to recover, and maybe you're doing full body twice a week, or you can split things up between upper body, lower body. It's all going to depend on what you enjoy, right? Because the main thing with exercise is we're only going to continue it if we enjoy it or see the benefit of it. And so to the point of how do I know how much my body needs? Your body will tell you based on its recovery level. So if you're, we like to say in PT that you might be sore for a day after this. And if your muscles are sore for a day, that's a good thing because that means they're building back stronger. If they're sore for, I usually say more than 48 hours, so more than 2 days, that means you probably did a little too much. And so you might want to back it off a little bit. But if you're basically working out and you're finding that there's really poor recovery and you're exhausted and you're kind of slogging through workouts, that means you're probably doing too much. And sometimes the answer is we need less working out and more sleep. I was just sick a couple weeks ago and I didn't work out. I was just walking for 2 weeks because if I had pushed through workouts, I did try to run and my body was feeling depleted. And so I think we need to listen to the changes in honoring that dynamic environment of what else is going on in our life. How busy are we? Are we getting sleep? How stressed are we? And then monitoring exercise, weaving in exercise where we can in a way that doesn't make us stressed out. So that can look very different season to season, week to week. It can change based on your menstrual cycle. So it's definitely a depends answer, but getting in, both aerobic and resistance training is ideal. And then again, feeling like your body is recovering a day or so later is important. We don't want to just be feeling depleted all the time because that would be overdoing it. But I also say don't stray away from feeling a little bit sore too, because if we're never getting sore in our muscles, then we're probably not doing enough. We're not giving them enough of a stimulus to build stronger, and then we're not going to gain lean body mass. So it's finding that balance, and that takes a lot of time. That's ever changing. Okay, next question. What even are vitamins? That's a good start. And then what is vitamin D and how am I getting that from the sun? So what even are vitamins? That's a good question. Vitamins and minerals, so those are our micronutrients. Those are basically what they're doing in the body is they're coenzymes and cofactors. Without getting too into the weeds, we have our fat-soluble and our water-soluble vitamins. So some vitamins that we think about, so our fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K. A lot of vitamin D is something that people talk about often. And then our water-soluble vitamins are our B vitamins and vitamin C. And so those are acting as cofactors or enzymes to basically regulate almost everything in the body. So they're important from a DNA synthesis level, from creating red blood cells, from running our metabolism and our energy pathways, from running the liver detox pathways, from building neurotransmitters. Those micronutrients are making sure that the pathways in the body are working faster and optimally. And so if we don't have those micronutrients, such as vitamins, and I would group minerals in there as well because they are doing similar things, those reactions, one, cannot occur at all or cannot occur optimally, put it that way. So we need specific, for example, vitamins and minerals in order to build neurotransmitters. And if you look in a nutritional biochemistry textbook, you know those exact micronutrients that are needed. And so if we don't have magnesium, if we don't have iron, if we don't have some of those very specific micronutrients, it's going to be hard to build those neurotransmitters because that's basically part of the recipe for them being built. Similar of like energy pathways of breaking down carbohydrates and fats in the body and proteins. We need magnesium. We need B vitamins. We need a lot of different things in order to run those pathways, in order to extract the energy from our food and turn it into fuel for our body. And so basically, if we want our body to work optimally and for us to feel good, we need those micronutrients, which is why we talk about eating whole foods, because essentially a lot of times those vitamins get stripped away, vitamins and minerals get stripped away when there's processing of foods, and especially ultra-processed foods. Yes, things can be fortified, but again, it's better in the things that are found in nature because those will be, at balanced levels as well. The question about vitamin D. So vitamin D is a big topic, and vitamin D is actually kind of extra special because it acts kind of like a hormone in the body, and it's incredibly important, and most of us are deficient in it, especially, we live in New York. So yes, it's summer now, but coming off of winter, most of us are going to be depleted. And even if we go outside, there's studies that show at our latitude all year round that we're vitamin D deficient. But mostly the sun is the best natural source of getting vitamin D. And basically our body, takes it in from the sun and then converts it into a usable form of vitamin D in the body. So one quick note about vitamin D, because a lot of people do supplement with it, is you do want to look for a vitamin D3 and K2 supplement. D3 is the active form that the body recognizes to use. So vitamin D3 is the best type to take supplementally to supplement, as well as K2. So vitamin K2 helps with the absorption of vitamin D. So I think a vitamin D supplement is very benign. A 1,000 to 2,000 IUs is a nice maintenance dose, but sometimes people need up to 5,000 IUs or even more if you're coming from a depleted state. And vitamin D is one of those things where, conventional medicine will tell you if you're below 20 that you're low in vitamin D, whereas in functional medicine, we really would prefer seeing it at that 50 to 80 level, actually, for, again, optimal functioning and not just surviving, but thriving. So vitamins and minerals, those micronutrients, are incredibly important for your body to work the way that it's supposed to work. What should I eat before a workout if I don't want a full meal? So that's a good question, and it depends on, I think, what your workout is and how long it is. So it's definitely when I talk to endurance athletes, when they're going out on runs that are like more than an hour, or sustained workouts that are long, especially over a long period of time, you definitely want incoming from the form of carbohydrates. So eating something that's actually a little bit easier to break down, like a faster carbohydrate, is good pre-workout fuel. So, it's kind of the opposite of the things that are regulating blood sugar. When we said we want to slow down the absorption, we generally actually want something that's breaking down faster to provide that glucose to our cells to basically work as gas in the tank for our workouts. So pre-workout, we go a little bit more on the carbohydrate side of things. So, something like a banana can be helpful a half hour before a workout. If you're going a little bit longer before a workout, you can do like a trail mix bar, or oatmeal is a great source because it's higher in carbohydrates and pretty easy to tolerate. But I feel like fruit or like a nut bar or some dried fruit can be really easy if you just want something quick. You can do a little bit of protein if it's going to be more than an hour before the workout, because that can help fuel you too, but you don't want anything super heavy before working out. So again, this is kind of like the opposite of what I would tell someone to eat for a regular meal. We don't want anything that's too high in fat or too high in protein, because those are slowing the absorption. And so you're just not getting the benefit of using that as fuel for your workout, if that makes sense. And that can sometimes make people feel a little bit sluggish. So occasionally, I work out early in the morning. So sometimes I'll even do like a rice cake. You could do honey, something like that, just to give you kind of like a quick hit of fuel before you work out. Next question. Red light therapy. So is red light therapy necessary? I actually think red light therapy is one of those interesting wellness trends going on right now that I'm not mad about. And I am interested in it. I haven't purchased a red light mask or a red light myself, but I'm actually looking into it because it does have a multitude of benefits. So we use red light in our PT clinic as a passive modality, and we use an infrared red light pad that you can just, again, kind of stick on a joint. So I've used it on the foot, or somebody having kind of like an unrelenting pain that isn't responding well to other things. I have had PT patients respond well to repeated use with the red light pad. I also have recommended it for like a hip flexor tendonitis, and that was actually really beneficial for reducing pain and stimulating healing faster. So I do think there's benefit from them. People use them for the skin. From my understanding, you need like a 20 to 30 milliwatts for like a skin benefit versus a higher milliwatts, like 100 to 150 for something that's going to penetrate deeper, like the knee or the thyroid or something like that. But I have heard anecdotally good benefit from it. And I think it's kind of one of those things of quality. So if it's cheap, it's probably not going to be high enough quality to produce the intended effect. And I know they can be expensive. So I think it's one of those things that can be out of reach, and it's one of those nice to have, not need to have kind of things. But that being said, it could be a nice way to habit stack, where that's kind of what's been enticing to me is I kind of want to buy one of those red light, freaky looking face masks, and then habit stack a 10-minute meditation while I'm doing that daily. And I feel like having that mask would make me sit down to meditate for 10 minutes rather than just 5 minutes when I remember, something like that. So I think it could be a nice kind of habit stacking or like evening cool down routine where you're like winding down, turning lights off, using the red light can be helpful too. Because we want to avoid that blue light in the evenings. So again, I think it's nice to have, not need to have. What are your thoughts on a juice cleanse? My thoughts are I've never recommended a juice cleanse to anyone, and at this point, I probably never would. So I have done a lot of research, and I have a Not Your Average detox program that's basically saying you don't need to do a juice cleanse in order to basically cleanse or detox the body. And so I think juice cleanses, I mean, one thing that could be nice is that you're getting juices delivered to your door and you don't have to think about anything. So I think there's a convenience piece that is kind of the only thing that I think would be a benefit about that, but you could also have food delivered to your door and avoid that altogether too. So, my first thing is, where is the protein? We need protein to support liver detox pathways phase 2 in the liver. And so again, if we're totally dropping calories by doing a juice cleanse, that's dropping a lot of calories really quickly. And again, depends on how long it is. If you're doing it for 7 days, 10 days, 14 days, you're probably gonna lose weight pretty quickly, but you're also probably going to be dropping both fat mass and lean body mass. And again, we don't want to lose lean body mass. So I don't think it's a productive means, and I think it just lends to that yo-yo dieting culture. I've never heard of anyone who's done it and had sustained benefit from it, right? If we're losing weight quickly, then we're going to regain weight quickly. In addition, I just don't think that I'm sure not all are created equal, but juicing itself is not my favorite thing. Can it be combined with a lot of other health promoting things? Sure. But when we juice things in general, if we have a lot of fruits and vegetables in there, they taste great, but unfortunately we're processing out the fiber that helps slow that blood sugar response. And so often we're getting probably some pretty good hits of blood sugar, of like an elevated blood sugar. I would think a lot of those juices tend to have a lot of sugar in them too. So I don't like that about it because there's no protein, no fat, no fiber that's counteracting that. So juice cleanses are a no for me. Okay, next question. This is fun. Which is more important, eating more healthy food or eating less unhealthy and processed food? I would say it's more important to eat more healthy food. And I think this is basically my philosophy of let's crowd out the unhealthy food with healthy food. So I think it's more important to be, again, providing those micronutrients, those minerals, vitamins, and all the macronutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, and fiber and fats. Providing the body those things will replete the body, help run all the pathways that we need to, give us energy to then do the things that sustain those habits that we need for long-term health. I think if we try to just say, hey, let's pull out all the processed foods, that can work for a certain, prototype of people, subset of people per se. If we say just stop eating any processed foods or highly processed foods altogether, I think it can work for a short period of time, but I think a better long-term strategy is just adding in. So, saying at every meal, let's try to get, 2 cups of veggies in, or I like to do a salad a day. So then you don't even have to think about it after a while. And so eventually you get to the point where you're crowding in and you're adding in so many good things, and you start to like those foods, that then those unhealthy processed foods automatically fall by the wayside, and it's more enjoyable that way. So I think to pull away from even just a mental standpoint feels really restrictive, or, like we're at a loss of like, I'm missing these types of foods, but you kind of don't miss them as long as you're crowding them out and eating a bunch of other really good foods, because eating healthy is delicious. And so once you add in all the good healthy foods, you're going to feel better. And that will, again, kind of get you on that positive shift of eating more of those foods that make you feel better. And then you're like, eating those super processed foods actually don't make me feel good. And your body will, you'll be able to sense that. A lot of people say, and I can say this true of my own self, you never know how bad you felt until you feel better. And so that's the case with eating when you start eating better versus your old way of eating, which may be highly processed. You kind of have to run that experiment of feeling differently to then know how you felt before. So a lot of people will do something like Whole30 or something like that at the start of the year. I don't think that's a bad thing at all, because that's kind of a little experiment to show your body, hey, if we do add in all these whole foods, and that's also simultaneously taking out the processed foods, I think it's a nice way to see at the end of 30 days how your body feels when you fuel it properly. So that can be, I think, a nice way to help people to see how differently they can feel. And our last question, how do I get more protein in if I don't like cooking meat? So many ways. So one, if you don't like cooking meat, but you like eating meat, there's ways to, get prepared meats. I honestly tell people, like, you could rely on getting a rotisserie chicken if that means you don't go to McDonald's. A rotisserie chicken, is it the best, highest quality meat that you've ever had? No, but it's still just one ingredient. So you can make things work for you. If you don't like cooking meat because there's like an ick factor or something like that. I mean, listen, I was a vegetarian for 6 years. So once I started cooking meat again, it was a little scary because I hadn't handled it for years and I didn't really know how to cook it. So I think it's like a question of learning how to cook it and making it taste good versus if you just don't like handling it. There's a lot of other ways to get protein in. Again, combining either animal versus plant-based protein. So just to go through some quick options, a serving of Greek yogurt is going to have 14 grams of protein in it. So that's fantastic. No cooking involved. A serving of cottage cheese also has about 14 grams of protein in it. No cooking involved. What aren't we doing to cottage cheese these days? I mean, people are cooking cottage cheese, but they're adding it to everything. That's really easy. Listen, this is making the case for my smash fish all the better, because the salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring, salmon often you have to cook, but those small tin fish are fantastic because they are already prepared as is. You can just pop them out of the tin and serve them up in whatever way you want. You can eat them as is. I think if you haven't tried that before, that probably wouldn't be your first go-to or my first recommendation for go-to, but you can. And so you don't have to cook those small tin fish. So that's one of the major reasons that I love them. They are really quick and easy to use. Lentils, a serving of lentils has, I think, 9 grams of protein. So relying on those beans and legumes can be really helpful. Snack-wise, a quarter cup of nuts generally has like 6 to 7 grams of protein. So that's a great snack. And then, our vegetarian sources of protein, tofu and tempeh. A serving of tempeh has 18 grams of protein, which is incredible and doesn't need to be cooked, though sometimes people like the preparation better. Same thing with tofu, high protein and could be eaten as is, although I think it does taste better if it's cooked in some way. But yeah, you definitely can get plenty of protein in without necessarily cooking animal proteins. Although I do think that animal proteins, again, because they're complete protein, have a really high nutrient profile that are going to be beneficial to you. But you can find different ways to incorporate that. Or maybe, again, like if you don't know how to cook salmon and make it taste good without drying the crap out of it, then when you go out to eat, you're ordering salmon. So there's different ways to get around this. I can say I learned from a friend a fantastic trick that really is tried and true for baking chicken. And, I'll buy like 2 pounds of chicken breast and just have like 4 chicken breasts on a sheet pan with a little bit of olive oil, whatever seasonings you want, salt and pepper. Usually I do a little bit of garlic and onion powder, sometimes some coriander, sometimes some smoky paprika. But baking that at 400 degrees for 40 minutes, it honestly is pretty incredible. It doesn't even matter like how thick or it wouldn't be like the super thin tenders. It would be like a regular boneless chicken breast. They turn out perfect every time and they're never dried out. So I think that's been really helpful, just knowing how to cook things. Investing in a meat thermometer so that you don't overcook your red meat. Chicken, we want to be cooked to 165 degrees internal temperature. Red meat can be like 145, can be a little bit lower. So those are just things to keep in mind. And I think just being curious and open to trying new things. I won't make you try liver today, but maybe we can talk about that another time, because Liver is a fantastic source of vitamins, of iron, and if you do like a 1-to-1 liver to ground beef, then that is a nice way to kind of hide the liver, but also get all the benefits from it. So, eggs are another great source of protein if you're eating more than one. So one egg has 6 grams of protein. And so you want to eat a couple eggs, but you could hard boil eggs. You could fry an egg. You could do scrambles, things like that. Egg cups or frittatas or anything like that. So there's a lot of ways to get protein in. I do think it's a priority, no matter what your health levels are. But I would say, don't just rely on one source. Use variety, because variety is the best thing for your body. And that's all for today. Feel free to ask questions or leave comments if you have any. And everyone be well.